Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with an update to the HOA story where OP got threatened by the HOA board and he then decided to erect a huge baby blue religious swastika in his garden to get back at the HOA. Without any further ado, let's dive right into today's stories. And the first one is titled, I live in California and have been paying my rent on time and just got a notice to vacate premises within 3 days. Apparently my house that I've been renting since April just went into foreclosure and sold at auction, and we never knew about it because our landlord/landowner stopped paying everything on the house. So a new realtor company or something just bought the house and has given us a notice to vacate within 3 days. What can I do? This is super unexpected and I just started the school semester. I have no idea what's going on. What are my rights? Do I really have 3 days to vacate? Update: thank you to everyone who has offered advice on how to move forward or advice on what my rights are. I have currently emailed the new landlord that we are planning on staying for the remainder of our lease, but we are open to negotiating a cash for keys option. I'll let them know that we have spoken with a lawyer and are going to send our lease agreement over, as well as requesting somewhere to send our rent to. What happened was the property owner got foreclosed on because of not paying anything for the house, mortgage, taxes, etc. We notified the property management company that we were receiving notices that the house was in possible foreclosure and auction, as we were getting notices here since late June and early July. So I doubt the property management company was completely clueless. And guys, if you were in this situation, what would you have done? Please let us know in the comments if you have any good ideas. Either way, a user in the comments said they have to honor any existing rental agreements. If you are month to month, then they have to provide at minimum 30 days notice to vacate. If they left contact info, let them know of your existing agreement and your intent to stay through the remainder of the lease, but are willing to negotiate. Look up cash for keys. This should be done via email and/or certified mail. Make sure you have a copy of your lease agreement and copy of utility bill with your name and address easily accessible in case they try to illegally evict you. Another user said, not a lawyer so I cannot advise you on much, but as a flipper in California, I can at the very least assure you that you have way more time than 3 days. Believe me, you are 100% protected, and if they are an LLC, good luck to them. Flex your rights. And the next one is an update to the previous story. Quick recap: my previous landlord was foreclosed on 5 months into our new lease. New landlord who purchased the property we are renting issued us a notice to vacate within 3 days. I contacted the new landlord telling them I know my rights as a tenant and would like to stay the remainder of the lease, or would be up to negotiating a cash for keys option, at the advice of some of the users on here. I was then immediately told that wouldn't be possible because our lease was fraudulent and we had to leave ASAP or they would contact the police. At the advice of multiple people on this sub, I contacted my university, which I attend, who got me in contact with multiple resources. Ended up applying for my city's EPP, eviction protection program, who assigned an attorney that specializes in tenancy law to me free of charge. My awesome attorney managed to resolve the entire matter within a week, basically told me the new landlords had no case and were more than likely trying to bully me out of my lease. She gathered all of the legal paperwork regarding the ownership of the property and who signed my lease, and spoke with the new landlord's attorney, who basically agreed 100%. I bet the new landlords are pissed. I ended up getting the new landlords to sign paperwork that same day saying they would honor our lease. Although I'm not feeling too comfortable after this entire crap show, so I'll be considering a cash for keys option to find a new place to live. Don't want to stay in a potentially hostile tenancy environment. Basically, my attorney is a badass and I'll be getting her and her team a gift of gratitude. Try to show your attorney some love. And I gotta say, Ripe Stars, I am very happy for OP that the situation turned out the way it did, but I gotta say, if I would be in the similar situation as a really young person, I would be pretty scared. The whole thing sounds very intimidating, at least to me. Either way, if you enjoy the stories about crazy landlords or neighbors, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support my channel. thank you so much in advance. And guys, the next one will be part 1 of the swastika story, which some of you have already heard, so in case you have already seen part 1 of the story a few days ago, then please skip to the update that is linked in the timeline below. And the first one is titled, HOA threatens to deforest your property, threaten them back with giant swastikas. My parents live out in the sticks, about an hour from the nearest major city. They were hippies back in the day and had taken to the off-the-grid lifestyle pretty well. They bought a bunch of land as an investment, but after half a decade it barely changed in appraisal, so they decided to live on the property instead. It ended up being where I grew up. After I moved out and started my own life elsewhere, a housing development moved in nearby, selling a similar lifestyle. They bought hundreds of acres and split everything up, building homes and selling them off to city folk looking for an escape. These lots completely surrounded my parents' larger property. Of course, they established an HOA and tried to get my parents to sign in and join a number of times. They put their little clubhouse right next to them and had their fancy entrance run right alongside their property. Fast forward 5-ish years, my parents still have not joined. The neighborhood ended up being pretty successful and the HOA is pretty loaded, so they added a church with a giant cross out front, a gym, a pool area, an outside theater thing and a little park, but are now running out of room on their lot of land. Skipping over some details because this post is already long, basically the HOA board members were dicks to my parents this whole time. I think they were trying to get them to either join or leave to buy the land, whichever came first. They called their property an undeveloped eyesore and tried everything they could to make their lives hell for no apparent reason. My parents kept to themselves and never bothered any neighbors. Latest update, my parents gave in. They signed the bylaws and joined the HOA. I don't know why, they don't seem to know why, but they signed the papers and within the week had 4 letters threatening fines and fees if the parts of the property closest to their clubhouse were not cleaned up, aka deforested. Being nature lovers, my parents didn't want their entire property to be grass and nothing else. They liked the woods and my mom even cried about not being able to see the usual squirrels and birds from her porch if this happened. They felt they would move before complying, however they signed the agreement and that was that. When I visited, I read through everything and found some loopholes. One of them was a landscaping clause that had appeared in the last 5 years, long after every other property had been cleared and cleaned of nature, requiring that each plant on the property be identified and pre-approved for removal before it can be removed, to preserve endangered species apparently. So I hired a botanist from the local college, $1,000 to come and identify the plants on the property and give a rough count, much better than the $6,000 being threatened in fines. Only $2,000 was actually threatened, but reading through everything they technically could find more and ended up sending more fines later. And by the way guys, who would have thought that a botanist would earn so much money? I guess I picked the wrong major in university. Anyway, 88 unique species identified and by rough estimates over 1,000 plants that fell into their category of requiring pre-approval. The next day I set about sending them hundreds and hundreds of emails for each plant to be removed one by one, everything from tiny saplings to 50 feet birch trees, most with pictures and the reference botanist's report for verification. I got 2 emails back for approvals of small bushes before they stopped. I kept sending them emails, at least 700 were sent before one of the board members called my parents to talk about it. Instead of backing down, they offered to expedite it and pre-approve everything to be removed. Not what we wanted, but I called their bluff and agreed. I explained this was perfect as I could now fill the property with giant swastikas even sooner than anticipated. What? Yes, I said, I would like to put swastikas on my property and getting rid of the forest will make them more visible from the road, clubhouse, pool and park, all alongside our property. I could even use the wood from the chopped trees to make a giant swastika the same size as their giant cross, 10+ feet.
You cannot do that.
That is discriminatory. My parents are Jainists. And by the way guys, Jainism or Jainism, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, is an ancient religion from India. And the swastika is a holy symbol for that religion and has been long before the Nazis. Section 2 of SB 1588 allows any religious symbol to be placed on one's property, and the HOA is not legally allowed to do anything about it. Don't worry, I said, the swastikas will have little dots in them so people know it is not for Nazis, even if it were though, First Amendment and all.
Let me call you back.
They call back and say the HOA board dictator is going to come over and talk about it. We went back and forth for like an hour about what exactly defines a reasonable change on the property, but eventually he actually backed down. They agreed my parents' property could be grandfathered in and would stop sending letters of intent to fine about the forested areas. My parents still get annoyed with minor problems all the time, mostly related to trash days and their driveway, but it is mostly subsided. Moral of the story: if privileged, power-tripping Karens are fining your parents for their lifestyle, threaten giant swastikas. And the next one is an update to the swastika story that we read previously. After sharing the specific details about how/why my mother signed themselves into the HOA surrounding their property, many helpful Redditors pointed out that the circumstances qualified for signing under duress. Her sister, my aunt, had been in a rather nasty fight with her new husband that morning, and it ended in a fire in their house. Long story, won't get into it, but needless to say, my mother was stressed as hell when they came by to try yet again to get them to sign away their rights. I contacted a lawyer friend of mine who has handled a handful of HOAs in the past. She believes this qualifies as signing under duress as well, and within the week came down to speak to their board director. His stance is that we had come to an agreement having my parents' property grandfathered in and therefore exempt from lawn maintenance standards and fines. And that this verbal agreement after the signing of the documents, while not under duress, meant that we didn't have a leg to stand on. Obviously that's some BS, and she wasn't having it. She told him she would be filing paperwork that evening and he should plan to see her and my family in court. He was not happy about this, so we had her over for dinner and talked quite a bit about our options. She loved my swastika idea and even encouraged it, which I was rather surprised by, so I started the next morning. I constructed a very crappy looking swastika after 2 days of hammering wood together, propped it up against a nice tree and hung 4 Christmas ornaments in between them to signify it as a religious swastika and not a Nazi one as I had originally threatened and as would be protected under Texan law. Unsurprisingly, I was approached by the lady that initially got my mother to sign the bylaws, utterly appalled at what I was doing. I explained my reasoning and stance, clarified them to be Jainist views, and went about erecting my roughly 8-foot tall swastika in the front yard, perfectly visible from the road, the entrance to their clubhouse, out the windows of their church, and from their community pool. 3 hours later, the sheriff showed up to the property. I drove down to greet him. He only had questions, saying he couldn't actually do anything about it even if he wanted to, and we talked for a bit. He was nice and seemed to side with my family in this whole feud we had going on. Bits and pieces of events occurred for the next 2 weeks, too much and of little significance to mention, but I will run through a few. At least 8 Karens felt the need to walk onto our property to take pictures. I was there 4 and threatened 3 of them. I painted the swastika baby blue so it was more obvious. The HOA apparently had a meeting to discuss the swastika and what to do about my parents ruining the neighborhood. Big update came just a few days ago. My lawyer friend said she had been in a constant back and forth with the HOA, trying to convince them to simply trash the contract rather than take it to court because they are gonna lose. Much of our leverage is the signing under duress and the fact that the HOA has provided no services to my parents in any form as they do other residents, although this is per our verbal agreement of leaving us alone. And my parents do not use any HOA amenities. We even have a back road on our property to get out of the neighborhood, so they cannot even argue we are using surface streets. The short of it is, they lost. The dictator caved yesterday after they got a rundown of lawyer fees, and supposedly even their own lawyer said he was not confident in them winning if it did go to local court, considering the current legal climate, whatever that means. We ended up coming to an agreement. 2 new papers were signed by my family and the HOA board. The first was them agreeing to nullify the original contract my mother had signed due to understanding she had been under duress due to familial troubles. The second was us agreeing to take down the swastika and refrain from similar religious signage, originally worded visual protest, in the future, and them agreeing to not solicit on our property as we have no intentions now nor ever of joining their HOA. If they solicit again, the swastika is going back up permanently per our agreement. I wanna give a major thanks to some of those redditors that suggested I do this in the first place, and a huge thanks to my unnamed lawyer friend for helping us out so much with this. I know you read the first one and are reading this, so thank you for 1000th time. I skipped many details and she could probably write a book with how much she went through to get here. I'm very happy to say we are back to square one, but an even better square at that. And guys, I gotta say, that is probably one of the most satisfying HOA story endings I have ever seen on Reddit. What a delightful story. And the next one is titled, Am I the a-hole for removing tree roots from my yard? My family and I moved into a new home this spring. We had previously lived in apartments and we now have our first yard for our kids to play in. The neighborhood we moved into has a lot of mature trees, and this being the first time I've had to do my own yard work, there has been a learning curve. One of my neighbor's yards is separated from ours by a chain link fence. There is a large tree just on their side of the fence. Some roots from the tree spread into my yard, and some of them are growing on the surface of the ground. They are visible and are above the ground quite a bit. About a month ago, my kids were running around and playing, and my daughter tripped on one of the roots, fell, and ended up breaking her wrist trying to catch herself. Of course, this was very upsetting to my wife and I, and she pretty much told me to do something about the roots so this did not happen again. So I bought some tools and started tearing the roots up as best as I could. I got them out to a point that nothing is sticking above the ground anymore and filled the top in with fresh soil and grass seed. My neighbor must have noticed the work I did because he made a comment about the fresh soil. I told him I had to remove some roots since my daughter tripped on one. He asked what I meant by remove, and I told him I dug a bunch out and cut them out as best as I could. He got pissed and told me I probably killed his tree. I told him that removing a few roots is not going to hurt a tree that big, and they were creating a tripping hazard. And since they were in my yard, I did what I needed to do to remove them. He told me there are other ways to deal with roots like that instead of cutting them out and causing stress to the tree, and he would have gladly helped if I had asked. He said that tree is probably going to die, which means it is probably going to have to be removed, and said that a tree this large is going to cost thousands of dollars to take out. I told him that sounds ridiculously expensive. He said if the tree dies and he has to have it cut down, he is going to ask me to pay for some of it because of what I did to the roots. I told him good luck with that and that I am not paying anything for his tree. He called me an a-hole and told me the previous neighbors at least had the decency to ask for help when they didn't know what the hell they were doing, instead of causing damage to other people's property. I told my wife about it and she thinks the guy is just being a jerk and agrees with me that taking a few roots from the top of the ground is not going to hurt a tree that big. She also agrees that there is no way in hell we are going to pay for anything for this guy's tree. We were just making sure our yard is safe for our kids to play in. It's not our fault his tree grew roots in our yard. And Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I almost have the impression here that this is sort of a reverse tree law story in which the OP is on the receiving end of a potential epic tree law saga. However, unfortunately, in this case, it is just a r/am the a-hole post, so usually there is no real ending or no real revenge or anything like that. So all we can do is try to judge OP on whether or not he is the a-hole. Please let us know in the comments what you think. However, a user in the comments said the following: "You are the a-hole, you should have told him what you were doing since it is his tree. And yes, even though the roots were on your side of the fence, it is the neighborly thing to do. And speaking as someone with a fair amount of experience with plants, depending on what kind of roots you hacked away, how many there were, and what you did to the open wounds before covering with dirt, there is a chance that you could have killed the tree." Another user said, "Yes, it is your property, but you really should have at least talked to your neighbor first to come up with a solution. It does cost thousands of dollars to remove big trees. You had to know that ripping out roots would hurt the tree. You're the a-hole." And the last one is just a little bonus story from r/Ripe Stories posted by user Stacy Roses Me, and it is titled Texas Roadhouse Fun. Yesterday my friends and I decided to eat at Texas Roadhouse. If you don't know what it is, it's a great restaurant that serves steak, fish and other great things. It's basically a Texas themed place that plays a lot of country music and has the best homemade buns with their cinnamon butter ever. I love this place and eat there often. Normally I get the fish and chips when I go there, but yesterday I decided to get pulled pork instead. Of course, this place is hopping busy, so we had to wait a bit to be seated and decided to wait outside on the benches instead of inside where the waiting area was. While out there waiting and chatting with one another, we all noticed this man standing not far from us. He was smoking and his pants seemed to be falling down. I was grossed out because you could tell he was not wearing any underwear. I don't want to explain how you could tell, but it was disgusting. This guy had horrible body odor and kept staring at us. We ignored him and tried not to look at him because of the pants slipping down thingy, and we did not want to be witness to his junk. After a while the man went in the restaurant and we remained outside until it was our turn to go inside and be seated. Once we were seated at a booth and the waitress had taken our orders, we noticed that man again. He was walking throughout the restaurant and from what we saw, he was stealing tips off the tables where patrons had finished eating. He walked past my table and the first thing I noticed was the horrible body odor. I noticed him go to the table across from us and swipe the tip that was left on the table, and I yelled out, "Hey, you cannot do that!" And the man jumped, turned around, looked at me and then coldly said,
"Mind your own business."
Which ticked me off, so I walked up front, talked to the manager about it, but he told me that they already called the police. They had asked him to leave earlier, but he refused and they have been watching him stealing all the tips. They were just waiting for the police to show up so that the man could be removed and arrested. I then went back to my table and told my friends what the manager said. Meanwhile, we kept watching the man, taking note of how much money he was making from each table. I noticed the waiters and waitresses staring at this man too, giving him the look. Soon afterwards, the police showed up and were talking to the manager before they started heading towards the man. While the police were there, this man had swiped money from 2 more tables right in full view of the police. I guess he didn't notice the police because one officer walked up to the man demanding to know what he thought he was doing. He saw the man, looked shocked, looked down at the money in his hands, then backed up at the officer and then proceeded to say,
"They stole this from me. I was just taking it back."
The officer, knowing what was really happening, said in that tone where you could tell he knew he was being lied to, said, "Is that so?" Raising his eyebrows, he walked closer to the man and said, "Let me tell you what I think is happening here." And before he could finish that sentence, the man threw all the money he stole at the officer's face and started to run off. While he was running off, the other officer blocked his way and this man's pants slipped all the way down, giving everyone in the restaurant a horrible peep show. Some parents of small children shielded their kids' eyes. Some people just kept staring at this man. My friends and I were disgusted, but we also noticed the other officer was quick to pull this man's pants up, so luckily none of us got to see that for too long. Both officers ended up cuffing this man and escorting him outside the restaurant while the staff were busy picking up all the discarded money that was strewn all over the floor. After a while, we saw the police car pull away with the man in the back seat, so we all were able to enjoy the rest of our meal without witnessing much more of that drama. We ended up giving our waitress a very big tip because we felt bad that she and her co-workers had to deal with that kind of stuff, and asked her how they were gonna sort out the tips. She told us luckily he only stole from 2 different servers' tables, so those 2 servers were just gonna split the money 50-50. I asked her if anything like this had ever happened before, and she told us this was the first time she's ever seen something like this happen, and was surprised it happened at their restaurant. We thanked her for the good service and told her to have a nice rest of the day. We soon left after that with a crazy messed up story to tell our other friends. Since I'm not sure what kind of flair to put on this, I will put choosing beggars, since this man was stealing tips from the servers there. I hope anyone that works in customer service never has to deal with something like this themselves, especially if you're a server that depends on those tips left for you. And if anyone that reads this needs a recommendation of a great restaurant to eat at, I recommend the Texas Roadhouse. You won't be sorry. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. However, this is not the end of ripe content for you. I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will hopefully soon show up on the left corner of the screen, which will provide you with hundreds if not thousands of hours of ripe content. If you still haven't gotten enough, then please also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos that you will only find on there. Furthermore, if you want to share your own story with our community, then please head on over to r/ripestories on Reddit, where you can share your own stories and there is a good chance that I might read it in a video. Thank you so much for your daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.